In the 18th century, the French feudal society was divided into 3 estates. The first and second estates were made up of the clergy and the nobility. Those in the third estate, the common people, were the only members of society who had to pay taxes. Although peasants in the third estate made up of almost 90% of the population, only a small number owned the land they cultivated. An estates general meeting had not been held since 1614. However, on May the 5th, 1789, the French king, Louis XVI, called the meeting of the Estates General to pass a law for new taxes. The Estates General was a political body to which the 3 estates sent their representatives. The delegates met at a hall in Versailles. The first and second estate members could sit, but the third estate delegates, comprising prosperous and educated people of the third estate, had to stand at the back. Entry to the assembly was banned for peasants, artisans, and women. King Louis XVI called this meeting because he wanted to conduct the voting as it had been in the past, with the 3 estates voting as individual bodies, having 1 vote each. The third estate demanded that instead of voting by estate, they should vote by head and every member should vote. When the king rejected this idea, the members of the third estate left the meeting in protest. The royal officials locked the regular meeting hall, but on June 20th, 1789, members of the third estate assembled in the king's indoor tennis court hall at Versailles. This group called themselves a National Assembly. They declared that they represented the French nation and took an oath not to disperse until a constitution was drafted limiting the powers of the monarch. This oath came to be known as the Tennis Court Oath. The National Assembly was led by Mirabeau and Abbé Sieyès. Mirabeau was from a noble family, but he wanted to change the feudal society. Abbé Sieyès was originally a priest. He wrote a very influential pamphlet called What is the Third Estate?, criticizing the clerical and noble privileges. On the morning of July the 14th, 1789, the city of Paris was at breaking point. A bad winter and poor harvests had resulted in high bread prices. To make matters worse, some bakers were hoarding supplies and the people were agitated. Angry at being made to queue for hours, crowds stormed into the Paris shops. Meanwhile, the king ordered troops into Paris, which started a rumor among the people that the soldiers were going to attack the citizens. 7,000 protesting men and women gathered in front of the town hall. They broke into government buildings, looking for arms to protect themselves from the troops. A furious mob of several hundred attacked the royal fortress prison, Bastille. The commander of the Bastille was killed and the prisoners were released. To the rioting mob, this hated fortress represented all that was wrong and unjust in France. The angry crowds pulled it apart and celebrated its destruction. The fall of the Bastille is considered as one of the greatest symbols of the revolution itself. In the French countryside, peasants were frightened by a rumor that the lords of the manors were sending an army of brigands to destroy their crops. Caught up in this frenzy of fear, the peasants revolted and attacked the chateau of their lords. As the rumor and fear spread from village to village, peasants burnt the manorial documents that had records of their feudal obligations. As a result of the spread of this great fear, nobles fled from their homes. Faced with these violent revolts, Louis XVI had to finally acknowledge the National Assembly. He accepted that his powers would now only be limited by the new constitution. On the night of August the 4th, 1789, the National Assembly abolished the feudal system, and the old system of feudal privileges and unjust taxes was over. Land owned by the church was confiscated, and members of the clergy gave up their privileges. In 1791, the National Assembly completed the draft of the Constitution. The new Constitution took away the absolute power of the king, separated the constitutional powers and distributed these between the legislature, executive, and judiciary. France thus became a constitutional monarchy. Under the new constitution, the Legislative Assembly had the power to enact laws and raise taxes. However, voting in the assembly excluded the poor and was restricted to upper and middle classes in the French society. The king and his ministers held executive power but were answerable to the assembly. The judiciary was independent of both the legislature and executive. The National Assembly's new constitution began with the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. This listed and protected every citizen's rights. The declaration stated that all men have equal rights under law and gave the world its creed of human rights, liberty, equality, and fraternity.